So, good morning, dear friends. We have 2,000 people here today, and this round of applause goes to you. Good morning, dear friends. So it's the fourth day of our assembly, Healthy Moscow, and we start here at today, main stage of our assembly, Botkin Hall. And today we're talking about what actually assembly can give us. It can give us a lot. What exactly? A special perception of a new approach, and also for the people who have nothing to do with medicine, we can understand what medicine is, what healthcare is, how it works. A lot of useful information that was outline for our spectators here, not just for medical specialists, but for our ordinary Muscovites as citizens. And today we're gonna understand how our body works, how our brain works. We're gonna get familiar with that. And the point that our next guest, who is gonna come to the stage, dedicated his whole life to this issue, to the functioning of our brain. I'm not gonna hide his name. You know his name perfectly well, and I would like to introduce him right now. And now, please attention to the screen. Andrey Kurpatov, president of the High School of Methodology and scientific head of a laboratory of neural studies and behavioral patterns of humans in Sberbank, have already issued over 3,000 different books, and it have been translated into 8 languages, and also founder of the intellectual cluster The Games of the Conscious, popularizes this subject and tells the audience about the functions of the brain. Here we to talk about neurophysiology of the personality. Why do we make mistakes, and how does our brain take solution? Andrey Kurpatov, please, let's give a storm of ovations, especially for you. Good morning. So I think that we're ready to start, ladies and gentlemen. Again and again, let's give a warm welcome to our Andrey Kurpatov. Good morning, good afternoon, dear friends. Thank you very much for coming over. It's a great pleasure for me. Well, I would say that it's really nice to see that so many people are interested in the brain. The brain is a very special part, and we should say that the time is ripe to focus on that. Well, of course, we sometimes say that it's just another organ, but it's an integral part of our thinking mentality. We lived in a special time, a third revolution, information revolution, and it had a serious impact on our brain and the way our personal perceptions of ourselves changed and what our personality is. So this is a huge subject of our today's discussions. I'm going to extrapolate a little bit more on that, and then you will be able to address your questions. So, those who read my book probably know something about this, but you know that personality is something is under the question. But today I'm going to explain you what we are. It's at the very beginning. So we are actually formation of little cells. It's like an ant house, and we're trying to create a little house. We have approximately 87 billion of neurons, and you have to understand that over half of them, they are located in the cerebellum. Well, you know, you can feel it when you, for example, move, and sometimes you feel the sensitive decisions that make you feel so. And even the robots, for example, yes, they were attributed some functions of cerebellum, and it made us believe that they could act as humans, but I don't think that they could perform all the possible functions. So it's mostly about cerebellum. And then we also are also under cortex cells. And of course, here there we have some neural bodies that are responsible for our biological functions. So we are more of monkeys, and that's 20% of the cells that are located in the cerebellum and also in the cortex. Are the one that are responsible for our behavior. Others go to our cortex and also the prefrontal part of our brain. I don't mean to say that they are absolutely responsible for our intellectual part, but they are responsible for creating the picture of our world and the way we perceive the world. So something that you hear is something that you see is actually the information that is processed by all those parts. We have different irritators, for example, mechanical one and others. For example, you can see the sound and our eardrums, they vibrate and you can feel this vibration and you perceive this information because a lot of neural cells actually process this information and you get this information via them. And the same is applied to music, to voice, to some visual pictures, etc. We have also receptors that can catch electromagnetic waves, photons, etc. And using photon by photon, you create this picture of the world. So we have a quite a limited number of receptors that can perceive this external irritators, and if we put it in the artificial intelligence, then it will have to think what it is supposed to do with all them. And we need also to understand that we have different parts and lobes, and also we have cortical analyzers that are supposed to process all this information, which is really difficult. I mean, to go through all our impressions related to the taste, to the sound, etc. So what about this cortex and how does it work? Some time ago, this prominent neurophysiologist David Hubel and Torsten Wiesel extrapolated on that, and they prepared a thesis about that. We know that they decided to experiment it a little bit on cats. It sometimes at the very beginning went out of their plan. They wanted to install a special electrode in a cat and thought that the cat was going to react to that and to see how neuron will go low on battery, and they will see how this analyzer works. But the cats refused to react to this picture. And so then they decided to modify the experiment, modify it again and again. And now you can see this horizontal line you can see that here is a still picture and the graph never changes. So then it's a little bit changes and then it becomes really active. And now you can see that electrodes finally works. So our neural network right now working within the visual cortex can perceive certain irritators, and it is responsible for the programming process, and that is how our puzzles are forms in our brains, and based on that you can create any picture you want. If you look at this picture, this is kind of a schematic nature, but at the same time, based on that, you can create books, and you can use different sticks or lines and create, for example, a rhinoceros, which I really love. Yes. Well, basically, this is like a Lego concept. They have a lot of neural cells there, and they are assembled together based on a certain task. So we tend to preserve certain memories, but the truth is that let's turn into no, doesn't turn. I'm trying to figure out how to work with this remote control. So we think that we have our memories in kind of a storage in a prepared manner, but actually Lego principle works there. You don't remember all the pencils that you used in your life because they have special colors, some physical tactile sensations. For example, I have a blister here on my finger from those pencils, and you have a whole set of them. And if I say, give me a pencil, Well, in hippocampum, you have your cells activated, and you try to think about. You turn your hands all around, and you see different objects. Pencils might have different appearance, and your cortex needs to collect this information. And then you will be able to act in a targeted way. So seems like everything is fine, and everything works pretty fine. You don't have to have a huge storage of all those neural cells that could store these concrete memories. And we also had some estimation that we say what would happen if we actually had to fix all the memories on a permanent basis. For example, if you are hypnotized, what would you actually could be able to memorize? So if it registered everything in your brain, then the volume would be enough just for 3.5 years. So just 3.5 years, so then your memory would be filled up to the limit. But it doesn't work like that. That is why we don't have this comprehensive memories covering all the details. And this is kind of a little pitfall because as a result we can actually collect all the memories that did never even existed. For example, Elizabeth Loftus works at the Washington University and also spent a lot of time working with those fake memories, and she tried to induct all those fake memories. For example, I take someone from the room and say, before that I talked to your relatives and they told me and shared some touchy story how you were lost at the age of 3 in a store. Do you remember that? And then in your head you have some processes triggered. You're thinking about some things that were related to the stories, and some details are evoked, and then finally you realize that you remember a little bit how you were lost there in the store. Maybe it's a little bit obsessed demonically, but you see that even this fake memory can be raised up to the bottom. So what about the personality? I want to be my own self. I just behave the way I want to. I want my life, my activity, and all other things be absolutely relevant to something who I am. But when I think about myself, I should say that, for example, you cannot memorize and you don't remember what you looked like when you were in your first year at school. You don't have this brain anymore, the one that you have when you were a 6-year-old, when you went to your first grade in school. You cannot just remember that. And we fall victims of those limits that are imposed, and sometimes we do it all the same. For example, Loftus and the experiments with John Palmer, what did they do? They showed a video where two cars crash one into the other, and the question was what was their speed when the collision happened, and the other group of people were asked what was the speed when actually it happened specifically. So it turned out that the one that were collapsed, they were 7 miles faster than those who actually collided into each other. It's well, we need to understand that this terminology is a little bit tricky because we have a different approach to that. I mean, collided and crashed, that's different. So, and 14% of those who knew that they actually crashed, they thought about the broken window in their memory, but 32% said that they collided, but there were no crashed glass. But if we talk about an accident, then inevitably it triggers the memories of this glass. Our brain now conscious, these are two things that are two united things, but at the same time these are two parallel things. If you have read my books, then you have heard about the experiments of Benjamin Libet. In fact, that it was just an application for another survey and studies, because right now we have some other modern studies, and they show that our brain can take decisions in a certain way. So we can see certain activity in the brain, and based on that we can make a prognosis, can make a conscious-based decision where and do it 8 seconds before it is taken. Sometimes yes, we can have this fake memories. It seems like you think on our own, and then it just informs us about concrete things. But it means that we also work with our unconscious parts. We think that we're all conscious. We have a will. We have the decision to act in a special way, and so on and so forth. But look at this data. This is the result of classical experiments. The respondees are given 40 cards. They are given some images, and then they are segregated into parts. Some of them are offered 40 minutes to sleep, and others just to take some part in an activity. And just look at the activity. Those people who slept, they recalled 85% of the cards, because while they were sleeping, their brain worked, it analyzed, it compared different things without your participation. And those who get distracted by some other thing, they could recall only 55% of all the cards. At the same time, our consciousness is quite a primitive thing, and we sometimes ask animals, do they have any intelligence? If you have ever seen a sleep animal, so you would have seen that sometimes they lost their consciousness, but then it goes back to that. I would say that again, it is located in the cortex of our brain. So now we can see the brain, and it is in two different conditions. So if you look at the upper part out of the zone area, then you will see this is the brain. This is when you have your brain thinking on its own. And when I say, for example, what are you thinking about? You say, oh, nothing. So your brain is just works on its own. It's all about nothing. And if I ask you, where is your seat? Just look at the ticket, and you start looking at it, trying to compare and looking for your seat. Then it will be in the zone. You can see this orange color. So it means that we have a different parts of the brains work in different situations, and our consciousness is very limited. You can work in a multitask mode, for example, when you have a lot of tasks, and if you have to tackle them, then brain will have to switch from one task to another, and in this case, the risk of committing a mistake on your part will double, and we can consciously assess only 3 elements of the task. So 3 aspects that we tackle, and also the longevity of our thought is just 3 seconds. It's really hard to imagine that, but if you think, I remember back in school, they used to say, and to give such examples, when you had a very long line and sentences, and just an ability to create such a sentence. But the point is that when you read such a sentence, you cannot keep it in your conscious. The duration of the information that you keep in your brain is only 3 seconds. Then it should be a dot, and then you switch to another idea. No wonder that we have this kind of syntaxes in order to fit in those 3 seconds. So speaking about those 3 problems, 3 aspects, we are very often asked, yes, we try to consider all those things. We can do that, but if you look some auxiliary instruments, and if you are given a certain task just to take into consideration 3 and more tasks, then are you going to be cope with that? This is a very interesting and famous experiment by Mr. Ulrich Neisser. You can see people dressed in white and blue, and the other group in black. So they need to give the ball from one team to another, from black to white and from white to black. 50% of people watching this video, they are trying to calculate the number of passes, but they don't even notice the big monkey in front of the video walking through it. So how does it work? And how do all those pickpocketers, all those illusionists works? Because you just work in this domain and you follow this. It's like the one that's focused with the caps. You keep a very close eye on just people in front of you who will give you certain instructions, and that is why you get easily tricked.
And then I should say that our conscious capabilities are not that bad, because monkeys have only two aspects when they consider the situation. And now in China they start transplantation of human genes responsible for the brain development to monkeys, thus creating human monkeys, so to speak. And they have transplanted a gene which was considered to be responsible for the amount of brain of an animal or a human being. And that was transplanted to a monkey. And the only difference that the size of brain didn't grow, but she managed to consider 2 or 3 options within the frames of decisions taken. It is a limited part, but this is better than with the animals, and this point made it possible for us to create civilization. And why am I here? Of course, personality is not that bad, but let's get back to how much it limited. And the center of decision taking is not there, and we know that due to Libeth and further on researches, if our personality is related to social roles, then we are completely explained by external factors. There are people born in one culture, other people born in the other culture, so this is a totally clear map. And maybe this is understanding of the world. What is personality when we ask such a question? Well, I suggest to start with such a key point. When we had this personality claiming itself, because in your personal story there is a time when your personality said, I'm here, and that was when you were around 3 years old, and you were going through a well-known 3-year-old crisis. There people are stubborn, they protest, and so on and so forth. You have a child who initially looks like a vegetable, lying down, then crying vegetable, then moving vegetable, then actively moving vegetable, and then you start bringing up your child. And when you started bringing up your child, then he said, I don't want, I will not do that, and at some point he'll say, I will not do this. Imagine how complicated it is to use the word I, because when in childhood you were told, Mashenka, let's have some food, you could say, Mashenka, let's have some food, repeating after other people, the way they call you, but at some point suddenly you realize I. You were never told I, let's eat, I go to sleep, and you said, I will not go to sleep. No, no way. It never happened. That was a very complicated intellectual process. When you finally managed to specify your desire, your will, your internal self, and you could identify this with the word I. And just remember, that was a protest situation, because if you agree with what happens around you, why should you say I don't want? Well, you want to sleep, you want to eat. No, I always defines protest. And I'm speaking about Vygotsky. This is a cognitive behavioristic approach in psychology, but this is psychoanalytical approach. Alfred Adler, one of the establishers of individual psychology within the frames of dynamic psychoanalytical approach. What does he mean while speaking about construction of our personality? He is speaking about totally the same thing. It starts with us feeling that we are dependent, that we are not complete, from the author of the term that we're trying to supercompensate. What is a child who has an opportunity to be commander of something. Just give a chance to control something, to rule something, and this game will be endless. A desire to compensate for something. That is our I. So we are pressed who felt this internal protest, and we decided that further on our striving for control, for power, that we demonstrate under any thing. So you want to be right in all the argument. Is anybody who wants to lose the... so I can provide you some treatment and some reference to you. It's normal desire to feel power over other people. It can be symbolic, but I was right. I was right saying that. That's what I said. So that is demonstration of power. And that is our person from the point of view of functional. So, and this function gets inside us deeply. John Kaslam made a very interesting research, quite a recent one, and that is of 2018. And in this research, he suggested some statements and then counter arguments. And it occurred that if you are asked some questions related to your abstract knowledge, let us say about Einstein, and Einstein made lots of mistakes actually, and not all of his theories were confirmed. Bohr was right, as it proved to be. Einstein was not right. And then we ask, was Einstein a great physicist? And you start doubting. But if you are asked questions about your political career, political ideas about life, and what is politics? Politics is with whom I can feel in as with the generalized conventions. What is the difference between Republicans and Democrats in the USA? Can you wear weapons? Can you make abortions or not? Do you allow homosexual marriages or not? And so on and so forth. So the whole set of requirements with which Republicans are clashing over Democrats. So no matter what kind of counter arguments you will be provided, you are not ready to deny your internal conventions. And because when we become member of some herd, when we try to identify ourselves with some community, these thoughts get into the depth of our brain. And what was showed by Kaplan in his research, at the moment when we hear arguments about our political ideas, we have activization of the part of brain which is responsible for fear, aggression, and also the other part which is responsible for insular, where our subcortex willings, desires, and whatever we know kept in our cortex. So our sociality, our feeling in some herd actually creates this personality. And so it is important for us how we look perceived by other people, whether we're not going to be exiled from the herd. That is why we are so much dependent on our conventions, those that are typical of our social group, and we're so passionate about it. So if you want to quarrel with somebody, you should discuss politics and any friends. Inside families, we see that there are some cracks, some problems. So this is this insular part. I was speaking about what kind of your personality. This is the true brain. And we have cortex, which is covering it, and we have insular part, which is right at the subcortex. And you have to cut the brain and find out that you have all the signals concentrated there, and you will have a feeling that you have a body. And when I was paralyzed, it was quite a special one, and you don't know what happens to your body. I closed my eyes and I couldn't understand whether I was lying down or walking or dancing, whatever. And there was no response from the body. And this is a scary feeling, and you always live with the feeling that you have a body, you live in some space, and this pulsation is collected here in your subcortex structures and integrated into insular part. And to the insular part we also have the statements downwards what make you become a part of social group with which you identify yourself. After that, you start judging from these integral moments, you start creating own stories. And now I move on to the next part, because we have to understand what it is, the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. So here you see George Lakoff at the picture, outstanding pupil of Homsky, and the student who was not who doubted, and he expressed how we create our idea of the world with metaphors and images of ourselves, and we do have this as well. And as long as we have already discussed that books, we read books of Dr. Kurpatov, I cannot but say about default system, which, as it proves to be, creates the story. So our default system is the part of the brain which works at the moment when we are not dealing with some concentrated activity, which is activized at any moment when we are not attracted by the external information. This is default system, and this is the zone that creates history. And this is a well-known graph as well. This zone works more active than any other brain zones, and responsible for a special regime of operation. At the upper line we have default system. It's burning like a lamp, and this is the moment when you do not understand what you think, and your brain thinks without your participation. Intermediate level, this is understanding when you find out something you are interested in. When you reach the table and you see what kind of food you like, and you have the network of meaning of importance. And when I ask you to solve some task or consume information, you will have a central part. This is a lower level in this graph. So here is our story, and for this story we have responsibility of default system of brain, which works without our conscious control. You cannot make your default system to work according to your wish and desire. So you are betrayed, for instance, you are deceived. Can you make your brain keep silent? No, you cannot, because inside of you it starts telling you everything. Well, lots of things at that moment, so please agree with me. Or you are depressed and you think about that everything is bad and so on and so forth, and I'm nothing, there is no future. Can you make your brain shut up? No. Why are you speaking such bad things about myself? Well, somebody can. Well, I can provide the reference papers to everyone. Well, we cannot make our brain to stop thinking and making conclusions, because these are the stories that we have to create in order to have an idea about what we should do next. So we have activation of default system when we sit at work. What are we thinking about when we are distracted from the computer? Well, in this case, this guy thinks how he's going to play golf, because he has some agreements. He was going to play with his friends, but as soon as he is at the golf field, he will be thinking about his date in the evening. And when he's at the date, he will be thinking about the time that it's time to finish. You'll have to wake up tomorrow early morning because of the boss, and so on and so forth. So these default systems created an opportunity for us to think about something that is not happening to us right now. It helps us to construct the future and thus go externally. We are outside of the condition here and now, and we start elaborating our life for the future. Unfortunately, as everything is based on uncompleted things, the life problems that you worry about, most of the thoughts that we think within the frames of our default system are unpleasant. So you quarreled with someone, you will keep on remembering about this. You will come to some place and you will face some complications and this or that, and your brain remembers negative things and think about the future. And here and now, you think how you're going to go to work on Monday. What is the difference of Sunday and Saturday? No differences, actually. Well, this is a rest day, but there is only one fact. After the Saturday we have Sunday, and after Sunday we have Monday. So your brain, your default system, starts speaking about events of the future, and as it was proven by researchers Gilbert and Killingsworth, these thoughts are mostly of depressive and negative kind, and almost 50% of the time we spend in this condition thinking over our relations with other people. So for many times I wrote you and told you about Franz de Waal, his research of monkeys. So now let us think why it is important to understand that it was not by chance that I provided Kaplan's research, where I showed how these statements correlating to the statements of our social group we consider personally important. Why it is so? Why do we stick that much to some of our political conventions? Understanding ourselves as a part of a social group, and this answer is found in the policy of a chimpanzee. What Franz de Waal did, with the help of his employees, they were dealing with the researching of how the community of monkeys live in a zoo, and they had quite a large place where they could coexist. And he identified that this society is very structured. What is it doing? How this default system was structured, which helps us to think not about what's happening now, but suggests to think about the future. Well, monkeys are dealing with the point that they comb each other. They are doing grooming for each other. They are not searching for any cockroaches in each other. Actually, they are touching the skin, and when your skin is being touched tenderly, then you have endorphins, and women have oxytocin as well, and you feel good because of that. And when somebody is trying touching you constantly, okay, let's continue, it's a good thing. And these monkeys are itching each other and creating social communications. And here we have pure mathematics further on, because as soon as we give a watermelon to one of the monkeys and say, please divide it with the other participants of the group, it will show exactly the proportion of this grooming. So all the thoughts related to grooming, they are not here and now, and that I just wanted to do grooming for somebody. Okay, now I do grooming, and now when something happens, for instance, there will be change of a head of our herd, or just change of the power capabilities inside the group, I will be in the pod where we are more comfortable within the frames of our group work. So the whole default system attached for the future, the task is to calculate social relations and think how to arrange social relations so that in every new iteration of our social group and its transformation, I would be among those with whom I would feel more protected, more reliable, and with better access to resources. So these structures, I would show you this famous diagram from de Waal, which shows that the width of this line is a percent of grooming between participants of this group. So at the top, monkeys are cunning. When they're making when they want to take power, they get cooperated, and very often you have two males at the top of the herd, and this is kind of grooming without any stops, because we have to stick to each other, and in this case we can control the whole group. And as soon as we quarrel and somebody will groom me and him, then everybody will feel bad at reconstruction of our social connections. So this is internal herd present inside your mind, and here we have this at the second year of Academy of Sense, and they arrange the structure of internal herd. This is described in the book, and in the same way, we have the same herd, and you keep on thinking about people with whom you are in this or that relations. You think how to deliver pleasure to somebody and how to avoid meeting somebody unpleasant. And this sociality is in the basis of creation of the amounts and capabilities of our brain. Here we see Dunbar with his famous research. He took 38 kinds of monkeys.
So he took their cranium, decided to analyze the volume of their brain, and it showed that the number of associated hurt grows with the volume of the brain. So the bigger the brain, the more we associate it. So as a result, the human being is a species with the biggest brain, so that we can incorporate as many people as possible. How many people can be there in our default system? So people you are constantly thinking about, and people just inevitably they are triggered by your brain, and so they are there. They come over to you, to your memories. How many of them are there? So it's approximately 5 people, and now we see that we have the so-called Dunbar layers. This is quite a standard thing, and we have quite close people to you, and there are like 5 of them. If they say like we have 100 close friends, so this is something bad with their brain. So 15, 20, this is the next circle, then 45, 50, and more. And relations with each group of people are different, and they are quite specific. They have their own particularities. But before, I want to show you that these trends really work, the social group that you are trying to create. For example, if we look at this study, they decided to analyze the Twitter when people were sending different links to each other, and you can see like previously 100 to 200 other soulmates. So this is the maximum that you can use to send those links, which is an absolutely procedure. You can say that you know more than 150 people. Yes, it's true, but all those people do not come to your brain, so to speak, just like that, all of a sudden. And others is just out of the herd members who come over. And also we have other people, maybe, I don't know, 200 people. You will definitely recognize them. I don't know, as Last Safeguard or somebody from their reception, etc. You know them, but they are not your close friends. Another 1,500 people who could just visually recognize, but 2,000, this is the maximum, including actors, writers, musicians, and so on and so forth. So this is your herd consisting of your people, and it is also linked to your social organization, not just in mass media, but we can see that this is an interesting phenomenon. If you say that this is a special part or special chain, that's a little bit different. So if you say that it's anyway, it's up to 5, but then it grows inevitably anywhere. It's if you compare it to the army, so it can be military departments and units the segregation that they have, it grows in size and it can be compared. So here we have the first 5 people of our closest interaction, and 12 to 15% to people. This is the next circle. So 5 people. If something happens, you call them and say, I need help, and you don't have this internal tension or inconvenience. You call them, for example, your friend. You say, I have a problem, and you don't feel this kind of inconvenience. But there are another 12 to 15 people where you call and say, oh, I know, I understand. This is a very, very bad thing. They support you, but you don't go directly to them for help. Why does it happen? So where do you get those 5 people who would like to address your request to ask for help without feeling any tension, for example, compared to those 12 to 15 persons? So what is the difference? Well, there is a significant difference. For example, social configuration of social networks that you have between each other. And they form based on the time that you spend on the people. In order to make a person go to your cycle, I mean close the cycle of friendship, you need to spend 200 hours talk to this person vis-a-vis, person to person, have this direct talk. Do you remember anyone and talking to for 200 hours talking to anyone? Just to get the so-called familiar and to make it to the third cycle. You just need to spend 40 or to 60 hours to do that. I mean, just people you know. And to do that, you need to talk to such people at least 1 hour per week within a year. So it's all about the time. That is, of course, limited. That is why there can be only 5 plus or minus people, because you have to spend a certain time on those people. It's limited. You cannot talk to 100 people and spend 200 hours on them. Well, you could do that, but I don't know whether it's actually feasible. So we are quite limited. We see this limitation. That's how we form our social herds. Well, apparently we have different remarks, etc. Say, for example, I mean, relative relations with the relatives, you don't need this kind of time, but for example, someone just swept your ass, I'm sorry, but you don't need to extrapolate it onto other endeavors as well. But also a little bit different with the man. For example, if we do something together, it's more efficient than, for example, for women. Women can do something together, but still they need to talk more than men, and it's more convenient for them, and it makes them closer. And now I can show you 2 graphs like this and like this and this. So you can see, quite tricky, but I can do that. I can handle it. So the so-called internal herd. When you find yourself in a new team and you find a new job, all your cells and although not cells but cages, they get filled in. But very often we had quite a reverse feeling. For example, divorce, when someone passes away, I don't know, when someone leaves the team, when your children leave the hurt, and I mean they kind of washed out from your hurt, and inevitably it triggers depressions and also these unpleasant feelings. So the problem of such a state is not about losing a job, for example, but the problem is that you have your internal hurt, and people just leave your hurt, and they just you feel they are dead, and they're dead people are lying around you because they just left you and they no longer exist for you. And this formulation, tell me who you are and I tell you, tell me who your friend is and I'll tell you who you are. I would like to paraphrase it. Tell me who you think about and I tell you who you are, because your internal head is actually something that reflects your self, your personality. This is your personality. You're gonna defend with all the possible means, because this is the only way for you to feel comfortable, the only way to feel a part of this social group. We can use the chemical substances in order to destroy your selfness. And some people, when they take this chemical substance, they say that there is no longer I am. This is an experiment that was conducted with the help of LSD by Mr. David Hutt and many others, and they are now always now again allowed. And it showed that our default systems they start to move very quickly when you use LSD. That the link between your self and your internal heart collapse, and you feel this. Start feeling the loss of the feeling. I mean, you no longer feel attached to them. We now proceeding to the final stage. As for the personality, I think I have already covered everything there, but we have to understand the following thing. We are now in a certain period of time where we are going through a colossal social problem. Previously, we were ready to spend time on other people, because when we were spending time on other people, it gave us a certain advantage. They were source of knowledge, source of competence, and so on and so forth. Right now, we're living in a world where other people no longer needed. We have different services. We have instructions that you can use, for example, on YouTube, etc. And you don't need to ask anyone about that. We also have access to the whole database that is available for human beings, and we live this through so-called digital autism. This is special studies that was conducted. So starting from 1987 up to a year when the iPhone was appeared. Here you can see social interaction face to face, and the red line electronic media use when you only spend your time with the screen. So previously, representative of the United Kingdom spent like 4 hours maximum with the screen and 6 hours with real people. And you can see here there is a tremendous change in that proportion. Now we are in a special construction or a special concept where you can see this data from 0 hours going up to 70,000. So you wake up and then you spend so much time on your phone. You keep touching it, opening it, and approximately we have 132 sessions per day, up to 8.5 minutes. Some people are even more dependent. This is the time that you spend within the internet. So 87% of the users behave in this way. So you touch your iPhone, but in order to concentrate on your default system, you need 21 minutes. It means that you do not actually exploit that part of the brain that is responsible for social relations, for thinking, for creating stories about your own self. Your perception is disappearing. So this digital autization or autism appears when we talk about these bad and improper socializations. When you talk about your relatives, your friends, people you know, and you understand, you think about them, and it's getting more and more difficult to communicate with them. They prefer social networks instead of real communication, and they're ready to say no to real communication between human beings because it's uncomfortable. They feel this inconvenience. They are not interested in some of the people, and all those people, they are more or less replaceable. It's not quite understandable what other people think, and sometimes we don't actually think about that. Have you actually thought about me, about my feelings? Well, it doesn't matter. We no longer care about that. And this willingness to spend your time on social networks with your gadget instead of spending your time with your relatives, whether it's a romantic relationship, a date, well, you are more attached to your cell phone than to your real communication. That is a real symptom of social this digital autism. Do you remember I told you about a city that was attacked by cholera and this situation? So actually here we have some Israeli studies. They conducted it, and here you see that the number of suicidal thinking is actually related to iPhone and the use of its device, starting from 1 hour and less up to 5 hours and plus. So you can see if you use your phone 5 hours and plus, this is how your suicidal thinking grows, and also your negative thinking. You also have growing aggressions, non-conformism, etc. This is a study that was conducted with the participation of the people who previously never used iPhone. They were given it and they were allowed to use it as many times as they want within a period of 3 months. And then I analyzed those who used it actively within a period of 3 months and never used it before. Well, surprisingly enough, there are still people who don't use iPhone at all. Yes, can be found in Israel. So if you look at this graph, then you will see the comparison of the people who use and don't use. This you can see the attention deficiency syndrome, inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, self-competence, etc. And these are people who use a smartphone. And the lower graph, you can see what happened with the people who started to use iPhone and never used it before that, prior to that. So they less trust other people, and they become more aggressive and regard others as enemies. So, and now I would like to finalize this idea and the value of this default system, which I would say something that you think about your other people, about your internal health, making predictions for the future. And what is particularly important is something that we know thanks to the recent studies and 5 groups of colleagues, American colleagues, that creativity and our ability to tackle difficult, intelligent tasks are actually very much dependent on our ability to look onto the future, the so-called distal modeling. We have proximal modeling. We think about the something that's going to happen right now, very close. We talk about a week, etc. But if I look at within a period of 1 year, 10 years, 1,000 years, I have this distal vision, and that is what is being modified. That allows me to feel my life with certain essence. Without a distal modeling, I don't understand what I'm living for. I need to have some kind of a vision, what I'm supposed to live for. And this digital autism deprives us of this feeling to look into the future and to see the perspective. So as a result, a modern person really suffers from these suicidal ideas, different social lack of social networks, etc., which inevitably leads to different factors and triggers them, which even more affect our power of social interaction. If we talk about young people, since we understand that they have a low level of social interaction, there are not so many social actions where they could develop it. So we have the so-called pathological story, which is a very good example when people really need this social interaction. They want to communicate with others, but they don't know how, and that's how they become aggressive, because they manifest this aggression. They try to attract other people to interaction with them, and if we preserve the only way to communicate with other people and to be, not just to hit each other on the face, then the question of social, this digital autism will be even preferable for us. And now, talking about neurophysiology of the personality of human beings and the crisis that we are inevitably are exposed to when we lose our social interaction, I would like you, and I really want you, to learn real lessons from this lecture. So philosophers who for the centuries they try to find this golden standards and rule as to how you can remain yourself, they formed kind of a concept concept that is called care about your own self. It first appeared in the antique time in ancient Greece, in Athens, and it was formed by Plato, and then it was also mentioned by Newton, but he discussed it with Socrates, and when he talked to Nucleobids, he wanted to become the owner. He said, you are gonna be master police and manage other people. So you have these ambitions, and he said, so you want to guide others, and are you able to manage your own self? What do you know about yourself? And now he thinks about one of the rhetorics that was raised by Socrates. I mean, this imperative task: know yourself, get familiar with your own self, and then you will do it. I want you to preserve your own personality, and inevitably it's about your care about yourself, who we are at the end of the day, who we are. And after you ask this question, and with Socrates, with his quite amicable relations with the young people, we come to quite a dramatic story. Civilizations usually die out during the peak time, and one of those who witnessed the death of the Roman civilization, one of the most prominent figures, representative of the Stoicism and the philosophy that required from people quite a serious capacity to guide your own self, despite all the possible endeavors and negative factors. You should never lose your own spirit and your own mentality. You should take care of yourself. You have to get to know your own self, to understand things happening around you, and at the same time, how can you resist to the possible challenges of life, and how to preserve your own self.
The second thesis which we should hear while we think about ourselves, about our personality, and we think about care about ourselves. And after these antique times, we move on to our time, that is 20th century. Unfortunately, it's no longer our time, but we move on to 20th century when Heidegger creates a new understanding of self-care concept. What Heidegger says, in 20th century, we lost a previous way of existence. And before 20th century, we lived with a different understanding of life. We expected death and life after the death, and we kept on thinking that there is something we live for because somebody has plans for us. But in 20th century, with Darwin, Freud, Einstein, and others, we finally lost this prospect for our life. We understood that we are final, and Heidegger, being a philosopher, described it very precisely. He said, let us see the face of our own death, let's see where we are going to, and being scared of that, or having survived this terror of non-existent, felt through our existence, so that every action would be understood as an action for which I have a chance, because until now I am inside my being, in my design. So Plato, Socrates, know yourself, Seneca, know how to control yourself, know how to manage yourself, and Heidegger, know to act here and now, understanding that you have a chance for that, because your life is final. And thesis number 4, which was created by Foucault, who dealt a lot with this theme, concept of care about yourself, which proves that after you understood yourself, when you have understanding of yourself, know how to tell the truth about yourself. And today's lecture that I tell you about how hard it is for us to find this reality, to find ourselves, and searching for truth about yourself is the highest degree of care about yourself. And thus you confirm yourself in being, and thus you will understand yourself, which deserves being comparable with the complications and the beauty of brain, and not only the small eye, which occurred from resistance to socium, which it happened in our infantile and remote childhood. Thank you. Thank you. Please applaud, dear friends. Thank you very much, Andrey Vladimirovich. So now we have 15 minutes. So attention, dear friends. We have only 15 minutes. That is why I would like to ask you for us to be truly interested, and Andrey Vladimirovich would be comfortable to answer your questions so that your questions would be interesting to public. Please think about this critically and think about the questions which would be really related to the lecture. If the questions are not very well from our theme, we will ask you to stop this and we move on to the next question. I do hope that your questions are truly interesting and urgent. One question, one person, and don't forget to introduce yourself. The first one, please. Good morning, Andrey Vladimirovich. First and foremost, thanks a lot for what you do. That really helps. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I have a question. Well, it's not related to the lecture. Are you going to have an academy of St. like grant positions, like a person in St. Petersburg who can afford studying with you from a different place, a different city? Well, we hope that soon in Moscow we will open and Muscovites will stop asking me about this. Well, next question, please. Introduce yourself. Hello, my name is Olga. Andrey Vladimirovich, thank you very much for this lecture. I would like to ask you about how toxic it is. This term is used very often right now, and they give such recommendations: stop toxic relations, do not enter these toxic relations. And I believe that people are speaking about this just to avoid relations facing the first difficulties. So what is toxic, and are there some basic reactions to somebody's behaviors, or is it our subjective relations that we can treat somehow, influence somehow? Well, it's a good question, and we like to have such words which capture the situation. And for example, laziness. There is no laziness, actually. There is no such neurophysiological phenomenon. There is absence of motivations, fear to do something, absence of psychical energy. We can make lots of other things, but laziness is not our property. The same is related to toxic. And there is nothing toxic from the point of view of which we can understand, but we can mention a number of phenomena which can undergo under this beautiful definition. And first of all, these are communication problems between people, the problem of arrangement, what is called in scientific slang theory of mind. This is internal world of another person. When I'm not capable of reconstruct the internal world of another person to understand what is important for him, what he's thinking about, how he understands that, and this is one of the indices of autism, not digital one, but true. These are people with psychical disorder who cannot reconstruct the world of other person. And in digital autism, the same thing happens, but not like in a healthy brain. I stop thinking about another person as another person with his desires and constructions and some internal conditions. And further on, there is a question: what I think about then? I think about my own interests. So what is important for me? If I like it, I communicate. If I don't like, I stop communication. Well, quite well fits the notion of toxicity. And here we have a very specific egocentrism, plus another construction, which I have already mentioned as well. Well, new social strategy. I cooperate with other people and I want to cooperate with them, but I did not know how to do that. And then I started the child. Well, like children, you know, when they torture a cat and the cat does not want to interact with them, and they want to interact with the cat, and they do interact. And now, more and more kind of these connections, I torture another person, and then he keeps on using his telephone. You want to interact with him, and he's using his telephone, forgetting about everything else, and you want to arrange some toxicity for him, especially if you cannot do anything else. You will just spoil this. So, actually, this is a huge system of different situations related with the loss of social abilities and also these herd belonging. We have hierarchical instinct, but it should be created in social area with a hierarchy existing as well. We do not understand how radical the changes are that are happening because we used to live in very complicated families with old people, grannies, grandfathers, and parents, children, and everybody understood this hierarchy. Now these families are no longer there, and the family life is shorter considerably. Marriages now are, as we put it, well, one marriage follows after another one for one person. Too many people you have to bring together in the same flat in order to survive that. And then a child becomes the center of parents' attention. And actually that is the only human who is going to stay for a long time with you. And then you start spoiling the child, telling different things, let him do whatever he wants, develop the way he wants. And a child has a hierarchical instinct, but he cannot obey. So I have a hierarchical instinct. It means that I want to take power, but I also know how to obey. If I only want to be in power and don't want to obey, I become a toxic personality. And now we can produce lots of toxic personalities. Well, thank you very much for this question, dear friends. I have 9 minutes remaining. That is why let's ask questions and come closer to the mic so that we could hear you. Thank you. Hello, my name is Pavel. Thank you very much for this lecture, for everything you do. And during the lecture, you said that if you remember every person in detail, a person can remember 3.5 years. And, well, what is eidetic memory? And what is eidetic memory? And whether a person is going to face with some psychic disorders within the length of his life, if he keeps on memorizing everything. Is this eidetic memory is it possible to develop this? You cannot develop, and there are people with phenomenal memory, but as you understand, any phenomenon has some kind of allocation. You must have seen dwarfs, and you must have seen very tall people. What do you call them? Giants. And there is any kind of trait is allocated. There are people with good memory and with bad memory, and in this case, memory is also not of photography type. Well, what kind of memory it is? Like, if you consider a research of Alexander Luria, he researched Chizhevsky, his patient, with this fantastic memory. So that these are monstrous sufferings, endless depressions, and this is terror from what you remember that. But he is not remembering in a photographic style. He remembers in gigabytes of video information. So if I remember what happened like on 15th of October 1979, it does not mean that I photographically remember every element of that. With my brain, anyway, I go into assemble that out of the puzzles, out of the Lego constructors that are in my brain. Yes, there are people with this well-expressed memory. You cannot train this. It is inborn. You can find different ways to digest information better. That is related to mnemotechniques. Somebody can use special mnemotechniques and remember what's important. Foreign language, for instance, mathematical figures or formulas, and so on and so forth. These are mnemotechniques, and somebody can use different ways to think. If you have a rich imagination, you can use some metaphors, some images, some add some artisticity to the facts you want to memorize, and they will be memorized. In my case, as long as I have a very bad memory, as I believe, I do not remember names, I don't remember faces, but I get concentrated on the point that I should memorize the essence of what's happening and integrate this essence into a number of concepts that I have related to that. Actually, this is my specific memo techniques. So I can produce an impression of a person who remembers a lot, which is a lie. Thank you very much for this question. We have 5 more minutes. Good morning, my name is Victoria. Andrey, you introduced yourself as a psychotherapist, psychologist by education, but psyche is a soul from Greek. And judging by your lectures, I got an impression that you imagine a person as a biological being deprived of soul. And I tried somehow to identify you. Who are you? Logical behaviorist or structural functionalist or so-called adopted Freudist? Who are you, Andrey Kurpatov? Oh, well, actually, this seems to be a nice question for everyone. Definitely not adopted Freudist. Well, I am a doctor by education, and I believe that mainly my world understanding is the same of a doctor. Doctors actually deal with objective reality to which they should influence in order to reach the result they need. When a patient comes to you, he or she tells you about the condition, and then you use additional examination tools that you have and use the system of knowledge that you have in your area, in this case in medicine, in order to understand with these parts, with these information tracks about what kind of a process is behind these symptoms. And when you understand this process, you can influence over it with special medicines, with special procedures, and so on and so forth. And in this respect, I'm methodologists of thinking, because methodology of thinking is related to the doctors who are involved into creation of reality models which help people to come to most productive results, implementing their strategies within the frames of this modeling. That is why I'm thinking methodologist and doctor. Well, thank you for your question, and I believe one of the final questions. Andrey, good morning. Yesterday, this scene I saw. I saw 2 people who associated themselves as cyborgs. They have explained themselves as cyborgs. Yesterday you were standing far as well. Thank you. It's better this way. And people tell me that they hear me all right. Well, could you please tell to maximum openly and sincerely answer my question? Whether I'm cyborg. No, do you have an experience of integrating your brain into your brain some other bodies? And if not, are you going to do this? No, I have nothing integrated until now. And well, actually, I think that we are very close to this phase. And now you never leave your smartphone physically. You have to carry it with you all the time. It falls down, and at some point when you are offered to integrate this small part somewhere behind your ear, so Wi-Fi is always in your head, and the number of people that will be attracted with this will be huge. However, I think that very soon we'll use implants. Very soon, meaning like 7 or 10 years, there will be some implants. And actually, neuro interfaces, when immediate implants will be connected to brain operation, and I believe this will be like 15 or 20 years. This is the prospect. And if by that time my brain is no longer in Alzheimer's disease, maybe I will carry out an experiment. So the most terrible thing that when you are in Alzheimer, you have all that in your mind, and then they make a digital model of you, download to the server, and for eternity you are in Alzheimer. So here you should be very careful about taking right decision. So, dear friends, I believe that the guest who asked a question was yesterday touched upon by Neil Harbison and Manel Muniz. So let's applaud to him. Well, thanks for this question, and this applause we dedicate to you, Andrey Vladimirovich. Thank you very much. I do hope that you are also touched by the stories, the lecture that was addressed to you. Thank you very much, Andrey Kurpatov. Thank you, bravo, and thank you for being here with us at this morning lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, before we leave the room, I would like to tell you about the fact that we are going to have a next lecture at 1:45. We'll see you with pleasure here. Why? Because at 1:45 at this stage we'll have sociologist and doctor, professor of Yale University, Nicholas Christakis. For the first time in Russia, he will speak about his research, the source of society establishment, about the fact that complicated society we live in is a result of natural selection for the improvement of socialization. What is social gene? Social gene is like Chuck Norris in all this infrastructure of socialization and how he influences over longevity and health. You can know at 1:45. Nicholas Christakis is a social Chuck Norris of our modern life. Please come to us. We're waiting for you.